July 28, 1979. It was a scorching summer day in Atlanta, Georgia, when a woman collecting cans off an empty, overgrown lot near Niskey Lake Road noticed the unmistakable stench of decomposition. The road, bordered by dense trees on both sides, led her closer to the source of the smell. What she discovered would mark the beginning of over a year of terror for the children and families of Atlanta. Lying in the woods was the body of a young boy. After she called the police, authorities identified him as Edward Hope Smith, known to his friends as Teddy. Edward was just 14 years old and had been reported missing a week before his body was found. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the back, fired from a .22 caliber pistol. The bullet, however, was never recovered, as police scoured the area. They soon realized this was not the only body they'd uncovered that day. Just 150 yards from Edward's remains, they found the decomposed body of another child. It was immediately clear this child had been there longer than Edward, possibly dumped at a different time. It would take more than a year to identify him, but eventually, the body was confirmed to be that of 13-year-old Alfred James Evans, reported missing by his mother a week before his body was discovered. His cause of death: asphyxiation by strangulation. At first, police were hesitant to connect the two cases, but they couldn't ignore the two undeniable facts. Both victims were black, and both came from low-income neighborhoods. Still, in Atlanta, city eager to build its image as a national business hub, the deaths of two young black boys were quickly swept aside. Little effort was put into investigating the cases. But in the months to come, the names of these boys, and many others, would force their way into the national spotlight, ushering in one of the darkest chapters in Atlanta's history. These were not easy days for Atlanta's South Side. Someone was abducting and killing black children, and as police failed to make progress, frustration boiled over. Reporter Sam Ford filed this report in the years leading up to the murders that would stain Atlanta's name in history. The city had already been trying to reinvent itself. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Atlanta worked to shed its old image, racing to become the new southern capital for business and commerce. The city expanded its metropolitan area, luring ambitious professionals eager to build careers and companies. Atlanta was no longer just another Deep South town. It was competing for the title of the New South, a rising leader in economics and culture. But beneath the surface, Atlanta wrestled with the same deep-rooted racism that plagued much of the American South. Despite recent KKK activity and lynchings, the city's rapid expansion didn't heal the racial divide. The white, affluent population enjoyed most of the city's newfound prosperity, while black residents continued to face systemic discrimination in housing, employment, and the justice system. Over time, though, public opinion began to shift as the city took real steps toward progress. Schools were desegregated. In 1973, Atlanta elected its first black mayor, followed by its first black police chief, public safety commissioner, and city council president. Atlanta proudly declared itself the city too busy to hate. On the surface, the future looked bright. The city promised opportunity, equality, and economic growth, a carefully crafted image it was determined to protect at all costs. So when reports of missing black children and rising crime rates surfaced, police and the media largely ignored them, desperate to avoid tarnishing Atlanta's reputation. It was easy for police to dismiss the deaths of Edward Smith and Alfred Evans as drug-related violence, but the communities affected refused to accept that narrative, and as more children disappeared, city leaders could no longer look away. Just months after Edward and Alfred were found, a wave of missing black children gripped Atlanta. The third to be added to this grim list was 14-year-old Milton Harvey. In early September 1979, Milton disappeared after riding his bike to the bank to pay off a credit card bill for his mother. It was the first day of school, but Milton had stayed home, embarrassed by the shoes his mother had bought him. Somewhere along the 3-mile stretch between the bank and his house, he vanished. A week later, his bike was found abandoned on a dirt road, but it would take 2 months before police discovered his skeletal remains near Desert Drive and Red Wine Road, over 12 miles from his home. His body was so badly decomposed that the cause of death could not be determined. To this day, it remains unknown. Then, on October 21st, 9-year-old Yusuf Ali Bell disappeared while running an errand to buy tobacco for an elderly neighbor. A store clerk remembered seeing Yusuf leave the store around 4:45 p.m. Another witness, who knew both Yusuf and his mother, claimed to have seen him getting into a blue car on Fulton Street, but Yusuf's mother doubted this account, believing the witness to be unreliable. For weeks after Yusuf's disappearance, his community came together, desperate to bring him home. What kind of boy was he? A reporter asked. Basically, a good boy. Bright, outgoing, not as outgoing as my other son, but he played the drums, the trumpet, and he was running for treasurer of his class. His mother explained why Yusuf was well loved, known for his sharp mind and kind spirit. His neighbors blanketed the area with flyers, knocking on doors and asking for any information. If there's somebody out there that has him, his mother pleaded. I just wish they knew how much he's loved by me, by this whole community. Just want him back. The idea that Yusuf had simply run away made no sense to his mother. He wasn't that kind of little boy. He's involved in everything. The gifted program, the boys' club, karate classes, she explained. Frustrated by the lack of action from Atlanta police, Camille Bell decided to speak directly to the public, hoping her words might reach whoever had taken her son. Send him home. Just send him home. Let him call us, we'll come. Get him, they don't even have to bring him back. Just let him go, where he can get to a phone. Please, send him home. But weeks later, on November 8, 1979, her worst fears were confirmed. A janitor discovered Yusuf's body in the crawl space of an abandoned school. He had been strangled, with bruises and puncture marks on his neck. His cause of death, asphyxiation. But this case revealed something new. For the first time, investigators found fibers on the victim's body. A small piece of masking tape was stuck to Yusuf's pants and, clinging to the tape, were green carpet fibers. At the time, this detail didn't seem significant, but it would later become a critical lead in the investigation. Now, with 4 black children dead, 2 strangled, 1 shot, 1 undetermined, the Atlanta community demanded answers. Why were these cases being treated as isolated incidents? Why wasn't the city doing more? Leading that charge was Camille Bell, Yusuf's mother. In the months and years that followed, she became a relentless voice for the victims and their families, determined to make sure the world listened. What I'm saying to you is, loving your own children isn't enough. You've got to love my children. You've got to care about everybody's children. If you see a child walking into trouble, don't shrug and say, well, their mama doesn't care. If you care, you say something. If it matters to you, you stop it. If you see a child getting into someone's caravan, if it turns out to be their father, you speak up. You might feel a little foolish for a moment, but wouldn't you rather look foolish than live with the pain in your heart forever because you stayed silent? Camille Bell didn't just speak these words, she lived them. She partnered with other leaders in the community, determined to make sure her son's killer was found. She was a constant presence at City Hall, demanding answers from officials. She appeared on television, publicly pressuring the police to take action. She organized her community, urging them to prioritize the safety of every child. But for Atlanta's officials, this growing outrage was a threat. They had spent years crafting an image of Atlanta as a booming, prosperous city, full of opportunity and progress. Now, that image was crumbling. To calm the growing panic, city leaders repeatedly insisted the murders weren't connected, that they were isolated, unrelated incidents. The fear of bad press ran so deep that they even hired a public relations consultant to, in their words, improve communication between the police and the public. But for Camille Bell, no PR campaign could erase the painful, unanswered question: who killed her son? And she wasn't alone. Soon, the group of grieving, determined mothers would grow. Throughout Christmas and into the new year of 1980, the Atlanta child killer seemed to go silent. But as the months passed, the murders resumed, more frequent, more ruthless. The first victim of 1980 was 12-year-old Angel Latrice Lanier. She'd left her house to visit a friend and watch her favorite show, Sanford and Son. But somewhere along the short walk home, Angel vanished. A week later, her body was discovered tied to a tree just blocks from her house. Women's underwear had been stuffed in her mouth, and her hands were bound with an electrical cord. Like so many of the others, she had been strangled. Now, with 5 murders in 7 months and no word from police about any connections, the killer had grown bold. Over the next 14 months, the murders came with chilling regularities, sometimes every month, sometimes even more often. Next was 10-year-old Jeffrey Mathis. He disappeared while running a quick errand to buy his mother cigarettes. For weeks, even months after his disappearance, witnesses claimed they saw Jafari, but despite those sightings, Jafari remained missing. Then came 14-year-old Eric Middle. Around 10:30 p.m., Eric received a phone call. He grabbed a hammer and a few tools, telling his family he needed to fix his bike and rushed out the door. Police never determined who called or why Eric left in such a hurry. Less than 24 hours later, his body was found behind a building that housed a bar. He had been beaten to death with a blunt object. Red fibers were discovered stuck to his shoe. The murders continued relentlessly. On June 9th, 12-year-old Christopher Richardson vanished while walking to a nearby swimming pool. Camille Bell and other grieving mothers pleaded with Atlanta police to take these cases seriously, but the department still refused to acknowledge a pattern. Just weeks later, on June 22nd, 7-year-old Latanya Wilson was taken from her own home. In the middle of the night, her parents awoke to find the window pane in her room removed, the back door wide open, and Latanya gone. "I just want my little girl found safely and brought home," her mother cried. "I miss her, and I love her." A witness later claimed to have seen two men carrying Latanya away that night. The following day, 10-year-old Aaron Weich was last seen at a grocery store in southeast Atlanta. His body was discovered the next day, face down under a highway overpass. Investigators believed Aaron had fallen accidentally, ruling his death unrelated to the other cases. But his family wasn't convinced. For one thing, he was scared of heights, his mother explained. He wouldn't have been on that bridge. And it was too far from home. He never went down there. On July 9th, 9-year-old Anthony Carter disappeared while playing outside with his cousin. The next day, his body was found behind a warehouse, stabbed repeatedly in the back and chest. It had now been a full year since the murders began. 11 black children had vanished. 8 were found dead. 3 were still missing. Atlanta's children were being hunted, and their killer, or killers, were only growing bolder. For the mothers, for the residents of Atlanta, it was enough. In June 1983, mothers Camille Bell, Willie Mae Mathis, and Venus Taylor, the Committee to Stop Children's Murders, or stop their mission, to force Atlanta's leaders and police to treat these cases as connected serial murders. And at least on the surface, it worked. About a month later, Atlanta's Public Safety Commissioner, Lee Brown, announced the formation of a special task force dedicated to solving the string of child murders. It started with just 5 officers, tasked with finding links between the cases. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit was brought in. A list of suspected victims was compiled, a list that would shape the investigation moving forward. This was supposed to be a turning point, a sign that Atlanta was finally listening, that the city was finally taking the safety of black children and the anguish of their families seriously. But if the killer was watching, they weren't deterred. Just over a week after the task force was announced, another child disappeared. On July 30th, 10-year-old Earl Terrell went to the local swimming pool with friends, a familiar summer routine. But that day wouldn't end as planned. After roughhousing too much on the deck, Earl was kicked out. He left the pool alone. What happened next remains uncertain. Witnesses reported seeing him crying on the corner of Jonesboro Road. Another said he stopped by a house looking for a friend, but they weren't home. Somewhere along the short walk from the pool to his house, Earl vanished. But this case had a chilling difference. As his family frantically searched for him, they received a phone call. The voice on the other end, the middle-aged white man with a southern drawl, said, "I've got Earl. He's in Alabama. It'll cost you $200 to get him back. I'll call back on Friday." But the caller never did. Earl wasn't seen again for 6 months. His case marked one of the first times the FBI took an active role in the investigation. The claim that Earl had been taken across state lines made it a federal crime, and under those circumstances, the FBI had jurisdiction. But even with their involvement, months passed with no answers. It wasn't until January 1981 that the remains of Earl Terrell were found severely decomposed, alongside those of Christopher Richardson, missing for 7 months. The cause of death couldn't be determined. But the fact that both boys were found in the same remote location raised disturbing questions. They didn't know each other, yet their remains suggested they may have been killed and dumped together. "We don't know yet if this is a breakthrough," investigators admitted. "What we do know is, we're giving these cases everything we have. To find 2 children's bodies in the same place, that's significant." But while police scrambled for answers, the killer struck again. This time, it was 12-year-old Clifford Jones. He was last seen collecting cans with his cousins. They got separated and Clifford never came home. His body was found the next morning near a dumpster at a shopping plaza. He was wearing clothes that weren't his own. On those clothes, investigators found synthetic carpet fibers, the same type found on Yusuf Bell. Clifford, like Angel and Air, had been strangled. He was the 13th missing or murdered black child. for the grieving mothers and terrified community. It was 13 too many. Camille Bell and Stop intensified their efforts. They held press conferences to bring national attention to Atlanta. They organized neighborhood block groups to watch over the city's children. We're not ruling out a connection, officials said. But right now, we don't have the evidence to tie these cases together. But the community wasn't buying it. How many more children do we have to lose? One resident demanded. Before the police finally say, we've got a problem. Relentless public pressure forced the mayor to expand the task force from 5 officers to 17. They promised to work around the clock 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But just 1 month later, 11-year-old Deron Glass disappeared, never to be seen again. As the summer dragged on, Atlanta's carefully constructed reputation began to collapse. Businesses and investors started pulling out, citing concerns over rising crime and danger. The task force, once seen as a beacon of hope, was struggling, hitting dead ends, running out of leads. Meanwhile, the murders continued. 12-year-old Charles Stevens vanished, only to be found a day later, blissed, with the same synthetic fibers on his clothes as the other victims. With no suspects, a group of volunteers, calling themselves the United Youth Adult Conference of Atlanta, stepped in. They organized massive search parties, determined to find any sign of the missing children. On their first search, they discovered the decomposed remains of 7-year-old LaTanya Wilson, abducted from her home 4 months earlier. The searches continued, growing larger, more determined. Even the mayor joined the over 3,000 volunteers scouring the woods and streets. But as the community united, an old enemy re-emerged: the KKK. Their long, violent history in Atlanta fueled rumors they were behind the killings. Tensions boiled over after a deadly daycare bombing in the city. Fearing a race war, city officials scrambled to keep the peace. But trust was slipping away. And while Atlanta spiraled, more black children would vanish. But on the morning of November 1, 1980, 9-year-old Aaron Jackson vanished from a shopping center. The next day, his body was found along the bank of the South River. He was fully clothed except for his socks. His cause of death was chillingly familiar to investigators: asphyxiation. This time by smothering. Just 9 days later, Patrick Rogers, known to friends as Pat Man, stopped by his friend's house to see if he was home. When his friend's mother told him he wasn't, Patrick shared some exciting news. Man had shown interest in recording music they'd written together. Patrick and his friend Junior Harper had spent countless hours writing songs, so the attention from a music promoter was a big deal. Patrick left promising he'd be back soon, but Patrick wouldn't be seen again for nearly a month, until his body was pulled from the Chattahoochee River. This was the first time a victim was found in water, not on land. His body was so decomposed that examiners could only determine he had suffered a skull fracture. His death was ruled blunt force trauma to the head. By now, the string of murders was making headlines nationwide. Initially, the FBI hesitated to get involved due to jurisdictional limits, but mounting pressure left them no choice. On November 17, 1980, the Atlanta FBI office launched a major investigation, assigning 25 full-time agents to the CASA number that would grow to 45 in the following months. December passed quietly, but the start of the new year brought a terrifying escalation. 1981 was shaping up to be Atlanta's deadliest year yet. Just 3 days into January, 14-year-old Louie Getter told his mother he was heading to a mall in southeast Atlanta to sell car air fresheners. He never returned. Weeks later, his body was found on the side of a wooded road. He had been strangled. Then came Terry Pugh, last seen selling empty plastic bottles outside a shopping center. 2 days later, a passerby discovered his body in DeKalb County, fully clothed and strangled. On February 5, 12-year-old Patrick Baltazar disappeared on his way to a boxing match. A week later, his body was found in DeKalb County as well, fully clothed, strangled and carrying vital clues. Investigators discovered small dog hairs and green carpet fibers on his body. That same day, police also uncovered skeletal remains belonging to another child. Dental records confirmed the devastating news. It was 10-year-old Jeffrey Mathis, who had been missing nearly a year after running an errand for his mother. Weeks later, on February 19, 13-year-old Curtis Walker went out looking for work after school. It would be nearly a month before his body was found floating face down in the South River, dressed only in his underwear. His cause of death, like so many others, asphyxiation. But now, investigators noticed a shift. Victims were no longer being left on land. Their bodies were turning up in rivers. The reason? Investigators believed it was no coincidence. They had leaked to the media. The carpet-like fibers were being found on the victim's fibers that could help identify the killer. Once that detail made the front page of the Atlanta Constitution, the killer changed tactics, dumping bodies into the water, likely hoping to wash away the evidence. Despite ongoing investigations, police had no solid leads in 14 of the 21 cases. In a few others, they had conducted varying degrees of investigation. One example was the murder of 13-year-old Clifford Jones, found behind a shopping plaza. 3 witnesses told police they had seen a manager of one of the plaza's stores take a young black boy into a back room. One witness even claimed to have seen the manager strangle and beat the child before dumping his body near the dumpsters. The suspect's alibi couldn't be confirmed, and he failed to polygraph tests. Yet, police chose not to press charges. The witness had an intellectual disability, casting doubt on the account. At the time, police weren't convinced a single person was responsible for all the murders. The cases, they argued, were too different. The Tanya Wilson S. case suggested a sexual motive. Edward Hope Smith had been shot, none of the others had. Some victims were found fully clothed. Others were stripped, even dressed in clothes that weren't theirs. Still, some haunting similarities couldn't be ignored. Most victims died from asphyxiation or strangulation, and the same distinct green carpet fibers had been found on several of the bodies. All the victims were black children or young teens, which led the Atlanta City Council to impose a citywide curfew for all youths under 16, effective from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. But the murders continued. On March 2nd, 15-year-old Joseph Bell vanished after leaving a seafood restaurant, disappointed they didn't have work for him. The next day, someone claiming to be Joseph called the restaurant, saying, "I'm almost dead," before abruptly hanging up. "What do you think happened to your son?" A reporter asked Joseph's mother. "I think he'd been snatched," she replied. "It's been over a week. If he was hiding, he'd have come home." When pressed again, she repeated firmly, "I really think he got snatched. Just in the last month, 3 kids, 3 attempts, right around that store. I think that's what happened." Over a month later, Joseph's body was found in the South River. Carpet fibers, identical to those found on earlier victims, were present, and his case wasn't the only one with a chilling phone call. On March 13th, 13-year-old Timothy Hill, who had severe learning disabilities, placed a call to his special education teacher, whom he was very close to, but when she answered, all she heard was sobbing. The voice on the other end responded to the name Timmy, but said nothing else. After nearly 15 agonizing minutes, the line went dead. A month later, Timothy's body was found in the Chattahoochee River. Like others, he was dressed only in his underwear. Traces of the same carpet fibers were discovered. By this point, residents had had enough. With the killings continuing, and no arrests, many began taking matters into their own hands. Groups of men armed with bats and guns patrolled their neighborhoods. These self-made defense teams became known as the Bat Patrols. The most well-known patrolled Tetchwood Homes, Atlanta's largest public housing project. Some saw these patrols as necessary protection. Others viewed them as dangerous vigilantes with weapons, a disaster waiting to happen. Both Techwood residents and the Atlanta Police Department condemned the patrols, fearing innocent people would get hurt before the real killer was caught. On March 20th, Public Safety Commissioner Lee Brown made his stance clear by arresting 2 patrol leaders for carrying concealed weapons. But while tension filled the streets, the killer remained undeterred. Over the next 2 months, 7 more people vanished, marking a disturbing shift in the killer's pattern. 6 of the 7 were adults, breaking the trend of targeting children. The first was 21-year-old Eddie Duncan. His body was pulled from the Chattahoochee River 11 days after he disappeared. Soon after, 20-year-old Larry Rogers was found decomposing on the floor of an abandoned building. Then came Michael McIntosh and Jimmy Payne, both discovered in the Chattahoochee River, both wearing nothing but underwear. That same month, 28-year-old John Porter was found stabbed 6 times on a sidewalk. Yet, for reasons never explained, his case was never officially added to the task force list. Not long after, 17-year-old William Barrett was found strangled in a wooded area. For the people of Atlanta, it was becoming unbearable. It was May 1981, and already 12 people had been murdered. That year, 7 of them children. 5 adults. Police claimed the sudden rise in adult victims was due to the curfew, which kept children off the streets and forced the killer to target older individuals. We're seeing fewer children on the streets thanks to the curfew and increased community involvement, officials explained. But many parents and residents didn't buy that theory. They credited the STOP organization, led by grieving mothers, like Camille Bell, for teaching families how to keep children safe. They believed it was STOP's tireless efforts, not the city's curfew, that had made a difference. STOP's work extended far beyond Atlanta. The group even organized a solidarity march in Washington, D.C., demanding justice for the victims and national attention on the crisis. All of this built toward what would become the first major breakthrough in the investigaria moment that would change everything. With more and more victims being found in the Chattahoochee River, the FBI launched a massive stakeout operation, monitoring 14 bridges from dusk to dawn. 72 officers were stationed along key points of the river, hoping to catch the killer in the act. For weeks, the operation produced nothing but long, grueling nights. Officers battled exhaustion, the biting cold, and relentless insects. But 3 weeks into the surveillance, in the early hours of May 22, 1981, the entire case took a dramatic turn. 4 officers, Galliel and Holden, Campbell, and Jacobs, had been stationed at the James Jackson Parkway Bridge since 8 p.m. now. It was just a few minutes before 3 a.m., and police recruit Robert Campbell, while stationed on the riverbank below the bridge, suddenly heard a loud splash in the water. Instinctively, he grabbed his flashlight and scanned the river. He saw ripples where the splash had occurred, but no visible object. Campbell quickly called out to fellow recruit Freddie Jacobs, asking if anyone was on the bridge above. Jacobs reported seeing a car traveling southbound, moving unusually slow near the edge of the bridge. The car, after crossing the bridge, turned into the parking lot of a nearby liquor store right where Atlanta patrolman Carl Holden was stationed. The vehicle never came to a full stop. Instead, it made a quick U-turn and headed back in the direction of the bridge, now followed by Holden and Officer Gill. The white Chevrolet station wagon continued toward Interstate 285, where officers finally pulled it over. The driver identified himself as Wayne Bertram Williams, a 23-year-old self-proclaimed music talent scout. When officers asked for his identification, Wayne seemed uneasy. "What's all this about?" he asked. The officers told him they weren't at liberty to explain. Wayne's response made them take notice. "I know this must be about those boys." When asked what he was doing out at that hour, Wayne claimed he was trying to find the house of a woman named Cheryl Johnson, with whom he had arranged an acting meeting for later that morning. But something about his story didn't sit right with the officers. He wasn't meeting Cheryl at 3 a.m. He was supposedly looking for her house for a meeting scheduled at 9:30 a.m. The officers asked to search Wayne's vehicle, and he agreed. In fact, they later recalled that Wayne stayed cooperative the entire time, though he appeared noticeably nervous. Inside his car, they found clumps of dog hair. Wayne explained his family owned a German Shepherd, which had recently been in the car. In the back seat, they discovered 2 grocery-style bags filled with clothing. One bag contained women's clothes, which Wayne said belonged to his mother. The other held men's clothing, including long pants and dress shoes. When questioned, Wayne claimed these were his basketball clothes, insisting he wore long pants while playing because he had left his basketball shoes at home. Also inside the car, they found a 24-inch braided nylon rope, a pair of suede gloves, and a flashlight. The officers questioned Wayne further. Had he thrown anything off the bridge? Wayne said no. Why had he been driving so slowly across the bridge? He denied doing so. Why did he stop on the bridge at all? Again, Wayne claimed he hadn't. He also denied making a U-turn, insisting he kept driving until he reached Bolton Road, then turned around. Meanwhile, back at the bridge, other officers scoured the area for evidence that could justify detaining Wayne longer. But they found nothing, no body, no signs of foul play, no blood on the bridge railings. With no concrete reason to hold him, the officers had no choice but to let Wayne Williams go. But this wouldn't be the last time his name came up. Around this same time, people began noticing that 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater, a man known to stay at a local hotel, had gone missing. In reality, Cater had last been seen the day before Wayne was stopped on the bridge, but it took 2 days for anyone to report him missing. The following morning, 2 FBI agents arrived at Wayne Williams' home, requesting an interview. Again, Wayne cooperated, welcoming them inside his parents' house. He repeated his earlier story. He was out that night, looking for Cheryl Johnson's address, claiming she had called him a few days prior about an acting opportunity. Wayne explained that he was the founder and vice president of Nova Entertainment Corporation, a company that distributed flyers and recruited young people between the ages of 11 and 21 for talent auditions. 2 days later, on May 24th, Nathaniel Cater's body was found floating in the Chattahoochee River naked. The autopsy revealed he had died from asphyxiation. His body was recovered roughly 1.2 miles downstream from the James Jackson Parkway Bridge, the very bridge Wayne had been stopped on days earlier. Nathaniel Cater's name was now the latest added to Atlanta's growing list of victims. Shortly after, the FBI asked Wayne to come to their Atlanta office for further questioning. They administered a polygraph test. Wayne later told the media the questions were aggressive and blunt. "You killed so-and-so. Why did you do it?" they asked. "Why don't you quit lying to us?" Wayne claimed agents told him his answers showed clear signs of deception. But in Georgia, polygraph results are inadmissible in court. Wayne Williams was now the prime suspect and, even without hard evidence, police were determined to build a case against him. They obtained a search warrant for his home and vehicle, collecting carpet fibers, dog hairs from his German Shepherd, and various documents and photographs for analysis. The following day, on June 4, 1981, the Atlanta Constitution published Wayne Williams' full name and home address on their front page. Within hours, his family's quiet street turned into a media circus. Reporters, cameras, and TV crews crowded the area, all desperate to capture the face of the man now at the center of Atlanta's most infamous murder investigation. But Wayne didn't shy away from the spotlight. That same day, he called a press conference from inside his parents' home, firmly proclaiming his innocence. He also criticized parents for not keeping closer watch over their children, saying, "Some of these kids are in places they have no business being." At certain times of the day and night, Wayne asked the press to protect his anonymity during the conference, allowing only audio recordings, but his name and face were already plastered across every TV screen and newspaper nationwide. While Wayne spoke confidently about his innocence, behind closed doors, investigators were quietly building their case. The fibers and dog hairs collected from his home were sent for forensic analysis, specifically compared to evidence found on the bodies of several victims including Nathaniel Cater. Fibers, tiny thread-like strands, can easily transfer onto clothing, carpets, or other surfaces. What makes fiber evidence so valuable is its microscopic structure. Each fiber has a unique cross-sectional pattern, determined by its manufacturer. In Wayne's case, the fibers found on multiple victims were traced back to Wellman Inc., a company that produced these specific fibers for only a short period, making them extremely rare. The same unusual fibers, with a distinctive two-lobed and one short-lobe shape, were found in the carpet of Wayne's bedroom. Investigators also discovered that dog hairs found on several victims matched those from Wayne's German Shepherd. They had enough to move forward. The FBI assembled a prosecution team. They determined there was sufficient evidence to charge Wayne Williams with the murder of Nathaniel Cater. On June 21, 1981, nearly 2 years after Atlanta's first child victim was discovered, Wayne Williams was arrested at his home. The prosecution wasted no time building their case. They concluded that, also charging Wayne with the murder of Jimmy Ray Payne, another victim whose body was found in the Chattahoochee, would strengthen their argument. As both deaths followed a disturbingly similar pattern, with a formal indictment secured, Wayne pleaded not guilty, setting the stage for one of the most high-profile trials in Atlanta's history, the state of Georgia versus Wayne Williams. On the morning of January 6, 1982, the Atlanta courthouse buzzed with reporters, cameras, and spectators hoping to witness history unfold. With a jury of 12 women and 3 men, the prosecution opened their case, painting Wayne Williams as a mad dog killer and a pathological liar. Through character witnesses, fiber evidence, and eyewitness accounts, they sought to convince the jury that Wayne wasn't just responsible for Cater and Payne's deaths, but likely for at least 10 more murders fitting the same pattern. The prosecution methodically broke down Wayne's credibility. Multiple witnesses testified that Wayne had lied repeatedly about his work, his whereabouts, even his alibi for the night he was stopped on the bridge. They revealed that the address and phone number Wayne had provided for Cheryl Johnson, woman he claimed to be looking for, led to dead ends. Williams claimed the girl lived in a nearby apartment complex. The prosecutor stated, "We had several apartment managers testify. Not one of them ever heard of Cheryl Johnson," with Wayne's word cast into doubt. The prosecution turned to physical evidence, the most damning of which came from forensic analysis. Bloodstains found in the back seat of Wayne's Chevrolet matched the blood types of William Barrett and John Porter, 2 victims discovered with stab wounds. The presence of specific enzymes in the blood suggested the stains were no more than 8 weeks old, consistent with the time frame of the murders. Dog hairs found on 11 of the 12 victims were also consistent with hairs from Wayne's German Shepherd. Additionally, 2 hairs recovered from the body of Patrick Baltazar were identified as likely originating from Wayne's own scalp. But the fiber evidence proved most significant. Experts testified that fibers found on many of the victims matched items from Wayne's home, some so rare, they argued. The odds of them appearing on this many victims, by coincidence, were astronomically low. In their eyes, Wayne Williams was the only common denominator. The prosecution then turned to eyewitnesses, challenging Wayne's claim that he didn't know any of the victims. Margaret Carter, who knew Nathaniel Cater personally, testified that she had seen Nathaniel and Wayne together just a week before Cater's body was found. 2 other witnesses reported seeing Wayne with 14-year-old Louis Getter at a local shopping center. One of them, a 15-year-old boy, testified that he watched Louis climb into Wayne's car. The same boy also alleged a disturbing personal encounter with Wayne, claiming Wayne had inappropriately touched him months earlier after driving him to the woods. When Wayne briefly stepped out of the car, the boy seized the chance to escape. One by one, witnesses took the stand, recounting moments where they saw Wayne interacting with young boys, sometimes just days before they disappeared. The prosecution's case was building, but the trial was far from over. It became clear this was no coincidence. The witness testimonies, combined with the fiber evidence, only strengthened the argument that Wayne Williams wasn't some innocent bystander. But why? What would drive Williams to murder at least 12 black children and young men? The prosecution introduced witnesses who claimed to know the answer. Several people testified that Williams often made disturbing comments, expressing open contempt for lower-income black people. Some said he referred to them with slurs and claimed they lacked ambition. One witness even recalled Williams asking if he had ever considered how many black people could be eliminated by killing just one black child. But while the prosecution laid out a compelling case, the defense was ready to strike back. With support from Camille Bell and other stepmothers, they argued that the case against Williams was based on circumstantial evidence, weak forensics, and speculation, not hard proof. The defense started by attacking the bridge incident that first put Williams on the police's radar. They pointed to Freddie Jacobs, one of the recruits stationed at the bridge that night, arguing that his history of unreliable observations made him an untrustworthy witness. Jacobs had openly admitted to drinking beer during his long shifts, and even claimed that, after a few drinks, he would sometimes see hazy white figures floating on the water, figures he described as ghosts. The defense argued that Jacobs and the other recruits weren't fully alert when they claimed to hear a splash that night. They also challenged the idea that Williams, a 5'7", 23-year-old man, could have physically lifted the muscular 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater over the bridge railing without leaving marks on the bridge or Cater's body. Next, the defense attacked the fiber evidence, calling it exaggerated and misleading. They argued that the prosecution made it seem like tens of thousands of fibers linked the victims to Williams' environment. But in reality, they said, only about 90 fibers matched, sometimes just a single microscopic fiber per victim. On top of that, they accused the prosecution of ignoring thousands of other fibers that didn't match anything from Williams' home, car, or belongings. They also introduced what became known as the reverse fiber argument. If fibers from Williams' home could so easily transfer onto the victims, they asked, why weren't fibers from the victims' clothing found in Williams' car, home, or environment? They argued that this inconsistency cast serious doubt on the reliability of the fiber evidence, and the prosecution had no solid answer for it. Just as the prosecution had eyewitnesses, so did the defense. Keith Andrews, the owner of Atlanta Studios, testified that Williams had been at his studio during the same time. A teenage boy claimed to have seen him at the shopping center with 14-year-old Louis Getter. A journalist also testified, claiming that Margaret Carter, who had placed Williams with Nathaniel Cater, had contradicted herself in a pre-trial interview, undermining her credibility. When it came to motive, the defense argued the prosecution failed to provide any psychological profile to suggest Williams had the mind of a killer. He had no violent history, no criminal record, and they questioned why a man who built his music career around uplifting young black talent would target the very community he was trying to help. With both sides presenting their arguments, the case was left to the jury. Would they convict Williams or side with the defense? On February 27, 1982, after nearly 2 months of testimony, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Wayne Williams was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, one for each victim he was officially tried for. The reaction to the verdict was unsurprisingly, divided. In the eyes of the mainstream media, the case was closed. Williams was Atlanta's child killer. Newspapers plastered his name and photo alongside headlines like "Child Killer Convicted," even though the two victims he was tried for, 21-year-old Jimmy Ray Payne and 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater, were both adults. For many city officials and business leaders, the conviction was a relief. Atlanta could finally put the nightmare behind them and begin repairing its image, which had been badly damaged by years of terror. But for the families and much of the community, the response was far more complicated. "I have mixed emotions," one resident told reporters. "There just wasn't enough conclusive evidence in any of the 10 other cases to say he's guilty outright." Another person, however, pointed to the timing. "When they got him and put him in jail," he said, "the killings practically stopped dead in their tracks. So, I say he was the man." "I don't know," another resident admitted. "It was a hard decision to make. Based on the evidence I followed, I couldn't have handed down a guilty verdict." Many, especially grieving parents, remained deeply skeptical. "If I believed Wayne Williams killed the other 12 victims, they claim," said Camille Bell, mother of Yusuf Bell, "I'd have to believe he killed my son too, because they said the same fibers were found on Yusuf's body. But I don't believe Wayne killed anybody. So no, I can't believe he killed my son." Williams had been formally charged and tried for just 2 victims. The prosecution had introduced evidence from 10 additional murders to establish a pattern, but that left 18 other victims unaddressed. Later, law enforcement quietly attributed 11 of those remaining cases to Williams, citing incriminating evidence, but no formal charges or trials were ever brought. With Wayne Williams' conviction, police declared, "We've reviewed all available evidence and, as a result, we've cleared 23 cases." But for the mothers of the victims, this was unacceptable. Their children's cases were effectively being closed without justice, without their day in court. They petitioned the Attorney General for action, but were rejected. A few months later, they filed a federal lawsuit demanding that Williams be tried for the remaining victims. District Attorney Lewis Slayton dismissed the lawsuit, saying it wasn't worth spending the county's money when Williams was already in prison. But others in the community believed the true story was far from over. Some felt Williams wasn't the only killer or even the right one. Rumors of Ku Klux Klan involvement had been circulating for years, whispered among grieving families and activists who believed the police ignored critical evidence. Given the KKK's long, dark history in Atlanta, suspicions ran deep. When black children began vanishing, many immediately pointed fingers at the Klan. Even the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, or GBI, took this seriously. In February 1981, they launched a secret investigation into possible KKK involvement. Wiretaps and informants were used to monitor Klan activity. What they uncovered was deeply disturbing. Members were stockpiling weapons, openly fantasizing about a race war in Atlanta, and, in at least one chilling conversation, casually discussed the murder of 14-year-old Luby Gettermans before his body was found. In one recorded conversation between 2 Klan members, one man remarked, "I might get out and ride around a little bit. Go find you another kid." The other replied, "Yeah, scope out some places. We'll see you later." Despite this, the investigation was kept hidden even from the main task force because authorities feared that making the Klan connection public could trigger mass unrest or ignite a full-blown race war in Atlanta. Once Wayne Williams became the prime suspect, attention turned entirely toward him, and the Klan investigation was quietly abandoned. It was one of many troubling oversights, highlighted by journalists and retired officers who examined the case. In his book The List, former officer Chet Detlinger argued that even the process of selecting victims for the official list of murders was flawed. He claimed the list was based more on political pressure and media attention than hard evidence of a pattern. Many cases that should have been included, he argued, were left off. Take, for example, 22-year-old Faye Yerby. Her body was found tied to a tree in January 1981, but excluded from the list because she was deemed too old, despite later victims being even older. Others pointed out the inconsistency of excluding Faye because she was female, even though 2 young girls, Latanya Wilson and Angela Knight, were on the list. Detlinger also claimed that the killings didn't truly stop after Williams' arrest, they just stopped being counted. In 1982 and early 1983, after Williams was in prison, 15 more black victims were murdered in unsolved cases across Atlanta. Many were found in similar locations and with similar causes of death. Many believe the Atlanta child murders ended with Wayne Williams' conviction, but others, including victims' families, don't. The city, however, was desperate to move on. The media quieted down. Officials insisted the crisis was over, and Atlanta returned to business as usual. But for the families of the victims, there was no closure, just unanswered questions. The investigation had its flaws. The fiber evidence that connected Williams to some victims was compelling, but not foolproof, and much of the case was built on circumstantial details. Even the victim list itself felt arbitrarily assembled, leaving out those who didn't fit the convenient narrative. Once police set their sights on Wayne Williams, key leads were pushed aside. As author James Baldwin famously wrote in his book, The Evidence of Things Not Seen, reflecting on the Atlanta child murders, the city too busy to hate has undergone the ordeal of 28 the official count violently publicized murders. Black Death has never before elicited so much attention. The attention, the publicity, given to the slaughter becomes, itself, one more aspect of an unforgivable violation. Maybe Wayne Williams was guilty of some or even all of the murders. Maybe he wasn't. What remains certain is that Atlanta, desperate for answers, may have rushed to close a chapter of its darkest history. And in that rush, the full truth of what happened to those 30 innocent victims may never truly be known.